Hello, this is the kubeadm office hours. Today is the 24th of June 2020. I'm going to share the agenda document in chat. Please add your names to the list of participants and your agenda topics. Just a second. And let me share my screen. Okay. I don't see new meeting participants. I mean, except for Josh, but he is present in other areas of Kubernetes already. So, PSAs, we have a recent breakage. Basically, the Kubernetes release started excluding the Kubernetes CNI RPM package. And basically this means that we combined the contents of this package into the kubelet package. And also we did the same for, I guess, Debian packages. But for RPM packages in particular, this caused a bit of an issue. So if you had an existing setup where you have the Kubernetes CNI package installed, and you try to install this new kubelet package, there's a conflict. So they tried to resolve the conflict, but I think they decided that the solutions are not very good. We also saw a number of reports about this in this ticket. We were basically closing tickets all over the place and rallying people to the same ticket. And the outcome is that we ended up reverting the change. So now the Kubernetes CNI package exists again. And I think there's a plan to remove it in the future, but they need to figure out how to do this less harmfully, and maybe like how to update the docs, kubeadm docs are affected and so on. So any comments on that?
No comment from my side. At the end, they reverted the change, so we are okay.
Yeah, overall, the existence of the Kubernetes CNI package was a bit questionable because, to my understanding, people really don't want to install the CNI packages standalone. So the CNI plugins standalone. Users mostly care about the kubelet combined with the packages. So I think the decision was overall correct, but these breakages were not expected, I guess.
Yeah. I'm not against the idea because at the end you have always to install both, and so it will simplify properly things from a user perspective. But given that, basically, given to the problem, I'm just commenting that from the command mean side we are fine because they reverted the change.
Yeah. I don't know how this is going to be resolved in the future, but I'm going to keep this group updated on this topic.
Thank you.
So, with the recent events in the United States and over the world with anti-racial protests and so on, in the software world, we ended up with an initiative to remove some of the offensive terminology from big projects. This is the next agenda item, by the way. And, back in the day in kubeadm, we followed what the Kubernetes project is doing. So we had a few instances of the master word. I just checked today, and we don't have instances of slave, whitelist, and blacklist, which are words that are also considered offensive. But we still have instances of master. which are most related to something that I'm going to talk about later. Before that, there's a formation of a new working group called working group naming. And basically, the working group is going to be responsible for cleaning the language from the Kubernetes project. Steven Augustus is in charge. A lot of people volunteered to join the group. I'm not exactly sure what decisions are going to be made or how the working group is going to process the tasks. But as a part of the ecosystem, we have the responsibility to clean the present instances of the word master in kubeadm. So I just did some research, found some links. I didn't manage to post them in the agenda. First, I wanted to show, you don't see my screen, but I'm going to share a link. So here, so this link right here explains, first of all, what we are doing with the node row label that is master. So, like brief explanation, in kubeadm, we have a label that we apply to the nodes, to the control plane nodes. And it is called node-row Kubernetes IO / master. And it originated, originally it was in Kubernetes, but then we started using it in kubeadm. And at some point, Kubernetes said, like, there's no such thing as a control plane node. There's no such thing as a master node. You can dictate your architecture. There's no such concept. So the fact that kubeadm deploys all the components on the same node is like an implementation detail of kubeadm. And this paragraph, like this section here explains, like, you know, we had a discussion about this, like, is it appropriate for the deployers to set this label, whether if it's called master or control plane or something else? And the outcome of the discussion is that components that a third party, you know, creating conformant Kubernetes deployments, or even have a special case for kubeadm here, which is considered first party component, may still apply a custom node row label. And this is also a wider sequence lifecycle topic, because I believe COPS, Cluster API, kubespray, like the, you know, the deployer syndicate of sequence lifecycle, everybody's using this. So this obviously implies that we need some sort of a cap if we make changes. But the general principle here is that we, like, third party and first party deployers, are allowed to use this custom node row. And this is about the label. If we rename the master label to control plane, you know, obviously there are changes, but we also use it as a taint. And the problem with the taint is that if you apply taint to a node, this means you have to modify all the deployments to tolerate the taint. Exactly, matching the same key, especially if the effect is no schedule. You know, we are breaking users who want to schedule critical add-ons on a control plane node. So at this point, I guess I want to get some comments, feedback from the group. And I think at least, like in this meeting, we cannot solve the problem. I need to like get some first steps for the plan of how we are going to transition, because this is not optional, we have to do it. And like, what is the timeline? So yeah, open for comments.
What I'm thinking here is that we should probably introduce a placement taint, say node row .kubernetes.io / control plane, and just deprecate the old one, but probably we'll have to deprecate it for at least 3 cycles or a year. And for the time being, while the old one is still deprecated, we should taint with both taints.
I agree. Also, in all use case, we rely on the label as well, because we have some node selector to make pods run on the control plane. So I would like to have the deprecation cycle for the label as well.
So is the thought here that we'll support workloads with the node selector because it's opt-in, and then we have the cycles for deprecation for which the nodes will be labeled with both node roles, and then we can expect the ecosystem to move with their renames.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's not possible, like where the breakage occurs because we have two labels, some combination of selectors, taints, or something else?
So the labels, if the labels in particular, we can have multiple labels, deprecate the old one, have the new one. But for the taints, we cannot do it, because if you apply a taint to the node, all the deployments have to tolerate the taint. If you add a couple of taints, all the deployments have to tolerate both taints.
Yeah. So we can add the label, but it would need to be like a feature flag or a post processor or something.
But if we need to change the taint into a deprecation cycle, I guess that it's not make sense to do a deprecation cycle to the label, because people you need to update the deployment.
Yeah, problem is the moment we introduce the new taint, we already breaking the existing workloads.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can attempt to write a pre-flight check that for cluster upgrades that warns users and has to be explicitly ignored unless the taints are migrated. It would be tough to write a migration tool because you would need to have the nodes be labeled with both the control plane and master label. And then you would want the users in that time period for which the labels are present on all nodes to be moving their taints. And then at some point, like say we use one kubeadm upgrade cycle to label nodes with both labels, we can at that point get everything deployed to where those nodes are targetable. In the next upgrade cycle, we could add a pre-flight check that looks for workloads that are tainting on the deprecated label.
One potential thing that needs to be taken into account too is the tolerations that we're setting, if any, as well. So we probably want to start setting the tolerations before we update the taint as well.
Yes, the taints and tolerations. I think I was actually talking about looking for workloads with tolerations, that taint. But yeah, as soon as we add the taint, it'll evict workloads. So those need to be deployed like in sequence unless we do something like modify the scheduler.
Well,
We
modifying
could,
this.
Mm-hmm.
Modifying the scheduler is like a little bit of an overkill, but I think that we can probably put up something like modifying admission controller, and just for a few cycles modify those tolerations and basically switch over to the new ones and fill some logs with warnings for users.
Mutating admission controller is an interesting idea. My only concern here is that I believe with mutating admission controllers, you need objects to be applied through them for the event to catch the object. So if the things already exist inside of the cluster, then there is still an action where like we need to shove these objects through the API server in order for them to be fixed, because it's an edge triggered system.
I think it's going to be hard to convince the maintainers of this controller to add this workaround. I can try, but I'm not giving any guarantees.
So I think if we start with adding bulk labels, and then we update any of the tolerations that we're setting in anything in kubeadm that we're deploying, and then give the warning that folks should plan on the change, and then we'll have everything in our house at least in order to go ahead and switch over the taints. And then, you know, we expect people do their external work in that amount of time as well. And then at that point, we switch the taint, and then we start working on removing the additional label and the additional toleration.
So are you suggesting, Jason, that we would say for this immediate cycle, we could move to double up on tolerations?
Yep.
So that the workloads that we manage are prepared for a taint that does not exist yet.
Exactly.
And then in a future cycle, after we've communicated deprecation to the ecosystem, that we would expect people to also update their tolerations. Once we are reasonably confident that we've notified people that the toleration, or that this taint is being deprecated and moved, that people have their tolerations moved in the ecosystem for, say, things like CNI, say Calico and Flannel and etc., then we can use an additional kubeadm cycle at a later point to migrate the taint.
Exactly.
And it would just be a full move from there. We can migrate the taint, we could remove the label, and at that point, that's when people would expect the breakage.
Yes.
That sounds pretty reasonable to me if we did that over, you know, a number of cycles.
Yeah, I think this is the only reasonable way.
Yeah, I agree. I'm only curious to ask to the new working group if they have if they agree with this plan, and if they want to set an agenda for this plan, because this has impact for the users. So if we go with the normal deprecation cycle, it will take 1 year to basically resolve the problem. And I think that this is a special case where all the community agree to make this as soon as possible. So if we have the sponsorship of the working group, I'm for following this approach, but for shortening the 1 year cycle due to the topic, due to the importance of the topic.
I can ask, the group is not formed yet. I saw the PR for the creation of the group today, but once the group is created, I can join a meeting, ask this question. Do you want this faster, or should we follow the GA policy? Because you know, the taint and label are arguably GA features at this point.
Yeah, and they will have a better picture of all the problems that the project is facing, and so they will tell us, okay, go faster because you are the only one that has the problem, or go slowly because at the end all the community needs 1 year. So I don't have such visibility.
Yeah. Okay. So for 119, I guess what should we start writing the campaign? It's already past the deadline for KIPS for 119. So I guess we need to have a cap for this anyway. But I guess it should merge for 120. This is my understanding here. So in 190,
Yeah, I think so, because also, what is the replacement for master? Control.
control dash plane.
Okay, it is up to us to decide, or it is up to the new working group.
I would imagine that the new working group will be informed by the previous verbiage choices that projects like kubeadm and Kind have chosen. Because Kind uses control plane as well.
Wait, Kite uses master, the master label in particular.
Yeah.
They use the label, but I think in the API they use control plane worker. Don't they?
Yeah, of course. There's the bigger argument that is going also related to this group, but it was spawned by a different topic. Like, how do we name, you know, the master node? How we name? Is it a control plane? Is it something else? I honestly think that we're pretty much settled on the control dash plane, and it's up to the the sequence lifecycle for kubeadm to decide. But I don't think we can pick something else here, to be honest.
Okay, I agree. Let's talk with the working group, telling the name that we think that we want to use, and the plan and the timing that we more or less agreed. I have an additional question, because I don't remember if it is in the kubeadm repository or in the cluster API repository, but we have people that is asking to apply a label to the workers node, to identify the workers node.
With a node, is it a node row label, or is it a node label?
Is a node label.
So node labels are permitted, but the admission is going to block node row labels. I think I remember the issue, it was about node row labels. Those are blocked by admission, and you can only apply them with a with a client that has sufficient permissions.
Yeah, but kubeadm has a sufficient permission. Basically, one of the main complaints, the starting point is always that people use kubeadm, create a cluster, one control plane, 3 workers, then the users execute kubectl get node, and as you see in kubectl get node, there is a column which is called the role, and only the control plane has a role set to master at this moment, but the role for the other nodes is empty, or I don't remember. So people ask, okay, can I have a role specified for this for the other nodes? And then of course here it is. Really. If you look at the list on top, okay, the agent or the workers have role known. So
yeah, I mean, I feel like this is not directly like this problem doesn't need to be solved at the same time, but it is a good thing to think about. I do think that this is related as well to the need for things like node groups and grouping or labeling nodes so that they can share a kubelet configuration and that kind of thing. Resolver configuration, similar.
Yeah, on this topic in particular, I see the control plane nodes being labeled by kubeadm because supposedly kubeadm is what manages them, and it is kubeadm that defines the roles for these nodes. But for the workers, I mean, like like Lee is saying, people can have different groups of worker types. Like something is handling heavy workloads, something is handling something else, and I feel that kubeadm pre-labeling those is not the right thing to do because there are so many role variations that the users might want to apply to them.
Yeah, I don't see a strong argument for why the information is necessary for kubeadm to do its job. So kubeadm, should not add the information unless it's necessary. But it's a different problem, than trying to migrate the master node role to something that's named more appropriately.
Yeah, in particular, the user story here is missing. I would like to see the node roles, but like, why should there be predefined for the workers?
I mean, a user can do this on their own. Nothing stops them from doing that.
Okay, let's keep the problem separated.
Good to bring up, though. Thanks. I didn't know that somebody had talked about that before.
Yeah, I mean, there was previous disagreement about this. Yeah. So why is Cursor API not labeling the nodes like optionally, for instance?
I think that for the same problem that we discussed now, it was just a topic that come on top of my mind while talking about label.
Okay. So I can start writing the cap. It's probably not going to merge as implementable for 119. I can talk to the group that is forming. In terms of I wanted to get back to this, the actual plan to summarize it again. We are going to include tolerations in our workloads for add another key and effect here to tolerate the new control plane. But should we also double label as the initial step? Yes. Okay.
+1. Yeah.
And once we have that running for unknown releases, we can remove the old tolerations and taints and labels.
Add a new taint at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, at that point, add the new taint. Yes.
And in the first iteration, we have to deprecate the label and issue a warning or action item for in the release notes.
And the action item will be for workloads to either select on the new label or to add tolerations for both labels.
Yes.
Which is a little awkward, but it's going to be necessary. And then those people don't have to change their tolerations after the label is deprecated.
Yeah, they can leave them like that. It's fine.
But eventually there will be a time where it's no longer necessary. So I imagine that's probably just going to stay there forever, which is a little unfortunate.
Yeah. At the end, when we will remove finally the label, we will raise a new action item that is, okay, remove the second, the old one toleration.
But the ecosystem will likely still be at a point where when we release Kubernetes, CNI providers are still using the minimum number of manifests necessary to support older Kubernetes versions in addition to the new ones. So they will likely leave them in place, even after the label is deprecated.
Well, at some point they'll eventually, update their minimum required version. And unfortunately, it'll just have to be until their minimum required version is the one where we switch the taint.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find one of the CNI manifests to look what toleration it has.
That's the only driving reason why I can think of potentially. Yeah, I think that's really the only reason why you would potentially want to modify the Kubernetes components to equate this taint inside of the scheduler. Is just so that the action item would not leak that label further into the community manifests. It's the only argument I can think of.
Well, the problem there is you would have to backport that fix to enable the community to adopt control plane over master, and that to work for the older versions of Kubernetes. And then once you start talking about
it only gets you earlier, basically.
Yeah. And once you're talking about that, you're also talking about like vendor distributions, that are releasing updates for unsupported versions and all of that weirdness. So I don't think that's really a feasible path forward for us.
Yeah. And the only benefit that comes from it is that it just moves the window from which the both tolerations are not required to an earlier dated time. Because you eventually do reach that deprecation point, and it's just a lot further out. So I definitely agree with you.
So I might be misunderstanding the taints and tolerations a little bit, but this is the Calico manifest, the latest Calico, and it only includes this. So it's like the operator exists, the effect is not scheduled, and it can still schedule the control plane nodes that kubeadm taints.
Yeah, maybe we have a misconception that the labels are being used in toleration.
So maybe this suggests that
if it is the case, we can just double label and remove and change the taint name.
I think this is redundant, to be honest. I don't understand if this is the case. This is the observation from the Calico installation. Then this is redundant here.
Can you look at the Calico tolerations one more time? So it's just tolerating in general, and this is for Calico node, no schedule, and critical add-ons only. And this would go for every node in the cluster regardless. Yeah, so it's not control plane node specific, but it needs to tolerate the control plane node label.
Exactly.
I see. But this is actually different than tolerating the node role, which has to do with it's node role specific instead of these effects. You could combine them together to actually only tolerate these effects on a node of that node role.
When I think CNI is a little bit probably the counterexample too, because CNI in general has to tolerate no schedule based on networking not being available for the kubelet as well.
can we think of other kinds of add-ons that might be using a different toleration?
One that I can think of is, what are we doing for the manifest that we're laying down, like for the kube proxy deployment or core DNS?
Checking. I think we're doing the same as the coordinates case. Actually, no. So this is what we're doing. So I'm very confused by this one in particular. We just have an operator with a missing key and effect. So I'm confused. How is this even scheduling?
I guess it would depend on what the defaults do.
So I'm going to run an experiment because we need some testing here. I think that we might be able to just remove this. And users can remove it too. And I think this is sufficient for to be able to schedule. I'm confused. I don't think this is needed, but I'm going to try it. Yeah, so I guess no changes for 119 anyway. Ross, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just quoted the documentation on this, so it appears to be some sort of a special case.
So an empty key with operator exists matches all keys, key values, effects, which means that we'll tolerate everything. An empty effect matches all effects with key value. Wow. So this means that this confirms that we don't have to match the node row explicitly, I guess.
Which pretty much makes sense for kube proxy, but core DNS is probably going to be the more tricky one, because what we're trying to say is that it should be able to be deployed on the control planes, but we don't necessarily want it running on user-defined taints.
Yeah, the preference is to install core DNS on the control plane nodes. If the control plane nodes go down, I've seen core DNS move to the workers as well, which is possible.
Yeah, and we definitely wouldn't want it deployed anywhere where CNI isn't available as well. So we can't just do a blank no schedule one.
Yeah, I guess this is still needed.
But the good thing is that since we control this one, it's easier to go through that deprecation cycle. It's just a matter of we can find and identify any external users that are relying on it.
Yeah, from experience, I've sent messages to Kubernetes dev, posted on the kubeadm Slack channel, Reddit even. And I get no responses, and then the issues at some point start appearing, like with people having problems. So I would expect this new working group that is being created to also handle some of the hate mail that we are going to receive for breakages. So I'm going to ask them about this topic as well.
So it might be good, in particular, reaching out to like the COPS folks, the Cube Spray folks, the Minikube folks, obviously Ben for Kind. I know in Cluster API, we're doing some interaction with the label, but it would be relatively easy for us to add support for backward and forward compatibility for whatever period we needed. So from our perspective, I'm not worried about it, about the change. But at least the other SIG sponsored projects, it would be good to see where they're currently relying on it, if at all.
Yes, definitely. I'm going to put this topic on the agenda for the next SIG meeting. Hopefully people are going to have visibility and comments on this. So yeah. Okay, anything else on this topic? I don't have any other agenda items. If somebody has anything they want to discuss.
I guess the only additional value add I can comment on is that an alternative to control plane is manager. It's what Docker Swarm uses, and it's the manager worker analogy. It's just shorter to say. I think I found myself not saying control plane sometimes because it's just long. And we were able to suss out several reasons explicitly why changing components like the scheduler is an unattractive deprecation option for this label. So if that conversation comes up in the future, I don't know how many notes we took on why we shouldn't do that, but we could probably all remember that we decided not to modify control plane components.
So I think in the case when you're talking about the scheduler and kind of the general kind of overall thing, I would agree that trying to lump all of the components as one control plane doesn't necessarily make sense, especially if you're looking at like pod-based control planes and all of that stuff, because you know they may not actually be centered on the same type of hardware. I do worry that if we try to change terminology, we're talking about a lot bigger change because we've already done a lot of the documentation rewrites and we've already gotten a lot of kind of community coalescence around the idea of calling these things kind of control plane nodes. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but if we do, it's a much broader discussion, I think.
Yeah, and I've sat down even with like contributors who have been confused with other deployment topologies. A good example is like Ubuntu's charmed Kubernetes does not deploy the control plane in pods, and the control plane does not run in the same LXC containers as the kubelets. There's no kubelets, and they were trying to deploy some security and auditing features that relied on scheduling a pod into the same place where they could inspect, you know, PS flags and things for control plane components, and that just was not possible, you know. So there's definitely confusion in the fact that like control plane is part of Kubernetes, but it's frequently not.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty comes when you start talking about different kind of opinionated deployment models like the default kubeadm model or what we're generally doing in cluster API or COPS or some of these other ones. You know, some of this terminology makes sense because, you know, you need an abstract way to talk about like the bundle of things that we're deploying as a control plane machine. But then in other cases it doesn't. So that's probably a good place to make sure that we're differentiating the usage and the discussions that or the usages of these words in the appropriate places for the appropriate concepts too.
Control plane is very widely agreed from the perspective of kubeadm, at least. We have it everywhere in source code and documentation at this point. The same way we used to have master, we renamed it and moved to everything to control plane. I'm still in favor of using control plane, but if we have, you know, maybe on a SIG level, if we agree that manager is the better term, I guess kubeadm should comply with the consensus.
been doing a GitHub code search of this label, and the add-on that I'm seeing most often being using this kind of toleration is actually like ingress controllers and service load balancers and that kind of thing. People pinning those things to the control plane nodes using the master label.
Technically, control plane originated in Kubernetes and is still used as distinguishing core components, control plane components. This is the
Yes.
this is what we're using, and a control plane node in the case of kubeadm at least signifies the presence of these components.
Yeah, something that runs parts of the control plane. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And,
so that is interesting that the ingress controllers seem to be the ones latching onto it, and at least from somebody who's been involved with multiple Kubernetes installers, that makes sense, because generally, you already have to put a load balancer in front of those hosts. So you also generally have, static,
DNS
access to those,
kind of
either
thing,
DNS or IP addresses. So it makes sense that you might also want to target that for ingress as well.
Also for things like load average, the load average on a control plane node is likely going to vary less than workers which are running high compute.
Yeah.
So it can be an attractive place to put things if you don't want dedicated nodes.
Okay. Any more comments on this topic? We have 10 minutes. I wanted to do a submission triage quickly, or rather PR triage. See what we have. So Ross, you have a new component cleanup. I guess they should merge after your other PRs.
Yeah, it's technically dependent on them. So it basically consists of two parts. The first part refactors the component config tests, and basically just uses the kubeadm's cluster configuration in place of a component config, so that we don't rely on kube proxies or any other external to kubeadm component configs to our testing. So in case some of these external component configs change or a new field is introduced in them, the impact on kubeadm is really small, and we don't have to go over our unit tests and change stuff. And the second part of this is basically just cleans up the old, this is the only test of load join configuration from file that was like extended and used as a partial replacement back in the day of the fuzzer test when it was disabled in the alpha 2 and alpha 3 days. So basically I just narrowed down the scope of this unit test and removed a lot of testing files, and usually these testing files were like PR targets by anyone who was actually changing something on the kube proxy or kubelet's component config, like adding a new field there.
Thank you. This is a great refactor. Do you think it's not, I guess, necessary to merge for 119, but we can still apply it?
Yeah, we can do whatever we like. So basically it's not a crucial refactor, it only touches tests, but yeah.
Okay, I'm going to apply the milestone. If we think it's not possible, we're going to remove it. One downside of this change is that we are no longer going to be able to see potential changes in the kubelet, which is a fairly active API that changes all the time, but still it's fine that we don't have to accept these modifications by contributors in kubeadm.
Yeah, they usually, like the kubelet changes don't break something for us, they usually just add a new field. It has the same default. So
Okay. I'm going to have a look at this possibly after we merge the previous PRs, or in parallel, I can try. All right, so
yeah, there is only one previous PR, that's the upgrade plan table PR. So
sorry, I may have lost my link. Just a second. Or maybe more than 1 second, depending on GitHub speed. So we are upgrading etcd server to 349 this cycle. I think the problem here right now is just we don't have the images of the GCR bucket yet. And it's some complications around switching the, there's a domain flip at Google, which took 3 months or something like that. It's not clear why it's happening, the problem there, but hopefully we can get this new version of etcd. The client is already updated to my knowledge. So we're now updating the server. These are backports waiting for approval by the patch team. It's about the re-adding the member. Don't re-adding the etcd member if it already exists. Like Fabrizio, I want to say that I don't know if this even works. I have not tested it. So we are only, like, we have sanity on the logic, but I haven't seen it in practice at all. So if in etcd, if you have if the member is already there, but the storage is not good, for instance, the storage for this member is not good. If you try to add the member, it already exists in the cluster. So a new member is not going to be added, but the storage is broken. So I don't see how this helps anything.
But I think the problem here was different. The problem is that we want to make phases independent. So the idea was to, or kubeadm join independent. So it means that we want to being able to rerun the command or the whole command or the single phases in a cluster where the command was previously run. So it's not meant to fix some to recover. It's just meant to allow to rerun the command.
This basically just is defensive coding that results in idempotent behavior, right? Because it would fail if it was already there.
Because we saw people that basically does kubeadm join, if it fails, run again kubeadm join, but the command was not independent, so this was becoming an infinite loop for these people. So we wanted them to allow to do this.
Okay. Ideally we should get some testing that these fixes we are doing are even doing anything for the reporters. Maybe we should ask Nadir if he can run the tests. Okay. This is work in progress. Richard created this PR. I haven't reviewed it yet. We can get to this hopefully next week.
is it actually, because I think it used to have a whip marker?
You're saying that it's not a work in progress anymore?
I think it had a whip marker in the name of the issue, on the name of the PR. So I think you probably renamed it. Can you scroll down a little bit to check for renames?
Yes, it's like, I guess we have we are pretty low on time. So if, do we have anybody on the call that wants to help the review on this, Pierre?
Yeah, I'll take a look at it tomorrow.
I have you as well.
Okay, thanks. All right. Robustness of kubeadm etcd operation. We have 1 minute. This, by the way, Fabrizio, this PR is waiting on you. If you can have a look at it at some point. It has been open for 10 days. It's modifying the etcd client to have the same retry logic for the dial and everything.
Probably I will have some time in middle of next week, not before.
Okay. Do you want me to ping you again on this, or?
I have the notification open, but I'm currently busy, so.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to end the meeting because we are out of time. Thanks, everybody. See you again next week. Bye.